the topic of today's session is workforce planning, and this is a really part one of a two-part session because it's a fairly broad topic. So just wanted to share a few slides on this, and this part one is really going to cover techniques, but it is going to delve into the broader topic of workforce planning as well. Thought we'd start by covering a definition of workforce planning, what we see in terms of trends and challenges, what is needed to address those challenges, and why Anaplan is a good platform for this particular business problem, and then a quick demonstration of some selected planning techniques. So in terms of definition, what is workforce planning? Well, in a broad sense, it's really about informing current and future demand for people and skills. Planning for your organization, taking into account the skills that might be needed for that and what your current skills complement is and so on. And then also, based on that, taking actions that build on your existing workforce to meet that demand. What are some trends that we currently see in workforce planning? Remote work is by and far, I think, probably one of the most important ones. Obviously, the last few years has shown that there's been basically a huge movement in terms of towards remote work, and that appears to be continuing. The gig economy, so a lot of independent contracting and so on going on, as well as the emergence of AI. I don't think you can really look at any kind of current events or current articles and not touch on or not come across an article that touches on the impact of AI. Matching skills with opportunity, being able to make sure that as an organization that you're equipped to meet emerging opportunities with the right skills. And there's also been a change in demographics continue to change as well. So being able to adapt to that is key. What are some of the current challenges? Well, number one is finding talent, right? Finding the talent with the right skills. Being able to deal with changing skill needs. So as new technologies and so on eventuate, making sure that you've got the ability to kind of adapt your workforce to those changing skill needs, and also closing any gaps that occur as well. There's obviously still uncertainty in the macroeconomic environment, so being able to also having to address that in addition to finding the right talent, closing skill gaps, etc. And from a talent perspective, I thought it'd be interesting to include this one, which is really global competition, right? And that goes back to the notion of remote work, is that, well, if you can do your work from anywhere, really you're competing against a much larger pool of people than you were before. So being able to compete in that sense is extremely important from a talent perspective. So those are some of the current challenges that we see. What is needed to address these challenges? Well, you need to get your arms around your data. I've worked with a lot of organizations in workforce planning, and in a lot of cases, the data that's needed, the insights that are needed, are residing in the minds of the people that are doing that work, rather than in some kind of platform or centralized platform or repository to capture that information. So being able to collect data from the disparate data sources, which include people themselves, in addition to the different sources of that data, is essential to establishing a data-driven approach. And being able to collect data on trends in peer organizations and peer industries is also essential, because it's being able to leverage that external data to extract those trends and insights to then understand where you are and then plan for where you need to be. So being able to capture that additional data is essential, and you need a place to put it. Disparate data in silos is really not going to get you where you want to be. And we see a lot of that in the market. The workforce needs to be at the strategy table. They need a seat at the table, because workforce has got to be an essential part of your organizational strategy. And you need to ultimately connect your workforce decision-making with your organizational strategy. The two can't really be going in opposite directions. And we see that as well. But being able to put those two together is essential, connecting them. you got to be able to, you have to embrace technology, right? Because in order to collect all this different data, put it into a single place, extracting trends and insights, understanding skill gaps, you need a technological solution to be able to address that. And you need collaboration, which is really all about connecting people, plans, and data. And one example of that would be, connecting revenue with people and understanding your current capacity and the skills needed and any gaps that result from that. So that's really what's needed. And why do we think that Anaplan is a good solution for this business problem? Well, number one, it's a flexible, agile, scalable, and secure enterprise data collection platform. It collects data from disparate sources and allows business users to get their arms around their data by, simply by taking something as simple as data residing in an Excel spreadsheet and taking that data, importing it into Anaplan, and being able to then glean insights from that. And that's something that doesn't necessarily need to involve your IT organization. So Anaplan is very much business user owned and allows business users to not only collect data, but also interpret it, analyze it, and also use it for planning purposes. So business users can extract trends and insights immediately. And also Anaplan immediately connects the upstream assumptions to the downstream impact. So by changing an assumption, maybe the revenue for the quarter is looking soft, and as a result of that, you might need to flex your contingent workforce. Having those two things connected allows for much more rapid decision making and being able to kind of pivot quickly to any emerging changes or trends that you see out there. And Anaplan allows that through its in-memory computational capability. It also is a connected planning platform, which means that it enables strategy, financial, and operation planning, as well as workforce planning, to reside in a single platform and be connected together. If you just think about the different data needs and the different people and stakeholders that be involved in those different domains, Anaplan brings them all together and allows them to work in a personalized way to their world, but be able to be connected as part of a greater whole and have, downstream and upstream impacts or connected impacts modeled out instantaneously, which really increases organizational agility and responsiveness. It also has a very engaging user experience that's personalizable to each team, so that, if I'm in HR or if I'm in sales or if I'm in finance, I have a unique way of the way I want to look at things, and also different data needs and modeling requirements and calculations and so on, inputs and so on. I can do that directly I can have my view of the world within Anaplan. It also enables collaboration, so people being able to work together and collaborate. It also has some different capabilities around things like stat forecasting, where if you wanted to get a handle on potential attrition, looking at historical attrition, Anaplan has stat forecasting capabilities that could allow you to automated forecastable baseline of attrition that then would feed into the rest of your workforce plan. And also too, if we think about, the emergence of AI and ML, Anaplan has a capability called Plan IQ, which really provides machine learning capabilities in a box, so that business users can actually, run through machine learning algorithms and measure forecasting accuracy to pick that best algorithm without having to rely on a data science team, and then being able to use that to then automate a forecast baseline. So Anaplan provides those capabilities out of the box through its Plan IQ. And I think there's already some videos out there where we've talked about Plan IQ and Anaplan working together, but Accelytics has Anaplan partner has unique expertise in Plan IQ and have actually implemented it for several customers. And scenario planning is also key as well. So Anaplan really excels in its scenario planning capabilities. So that's why we think Anaplan, and I'd like you to kind of keep some of these points in mind as I go through a demonstration. And that's where I'm going to show you some of these some of these different techniques that are available. So, you can't really do workforce planning without having some kind of planning technique. So that's why this is part one. In part two, we're going to delve into the connected nature, where we talk about, connecting organizational strategy with skills and gaps and things like that. But right now, I'm just going to showcase some different planning techniques that are available within the Anaplan platform. First thing I'm going to do, and Anaplan, just for the benefit of maybe those who have not seen Anaplan before, it's a cloud-based planning platform that allows you to pick any device and be anywhere in the world and go to anaplan.com, enter your credentials, and then you're presented with the content you've got access to. In this case, it's a landing page that's has different links that we can click on, and we can click on a link and view an executive scorecard. And dashboards are really the way in which users interact with Anaplan, not only from a planning point of view, planning and forecasting point of view, but also from a information consumption point of view. So being able to kind of view key metrics and do health checks on the organization and trends and so on, you can do that directly on dashboards. The first thing I wanted to point out, though, is really the ability to do things like establishing an organizational strategy, where you can actually go in and actually create different strategic initiatives directly on the dashboard. So you can actually click on a button on a dashboard, you can enter a new initiative, and then enter the parameters for that initiative and the goals and so on, and actually model out potentially what that would look like from a high-level planning point of view. On this dashboard, we've got a very high-level P&L. We've got different initiatives. One of those initiatives might be called Grow Revenue, where you might have goals of you want to increase your revenue by 12%, and there might be a corresponding increase in costs associated with delivering that revenue, and you can model out those impacts, and you have the ability to click in the cell and select from a guardrail of options. So, Anaplan is a very governed environment where people can only pick from things that you've got access to, authorization to, and so on. So if I wanted to go ahead and activate this initiative, we can easily do that, and we can immediately see that by trying to increase revenue by 12%, that's going to lead to about $10 million in net income. But there also might be some kind of capacity alert that occurs as well. And so one of the great advantages of having a platform, a foundational platform for all of your planning, is that it has the ability to kind of cut across those silos and be able to immediately alert you that perhaps as a result of trying to increase your revenue, you may not necessarily now have the right workforce complement to achieve that. And so you can have Anaplan checking those cross-functional data points and alerting you to the fact that now you might need to go ahead and adjust your workforce plan. You also are able to track all of the qualitative factors associated with this initiative, including the full business case, as well as the summary of it, the objective, what do we do next, how do we track it, who's responsible. All of those sort of qualitative factors that we typically see a lot in Excel can be incorporated into Anaplan. Then what you can do is then do a very high level plan that allows you to enter that 12% growth rate and immediately see how that cuts across, cascades down to your different regions and cuts across to your different product lines, and what that looks like from a monthly target point of view from a planning perspective. And you also have the ability to adjust the mix as well, in terms of being able to do things like multi-level planning, where if you wanted to override the US because it's been identified as a low risk candidate, to be able to flex that, maybe I want to put in 14% for that I have the ability to adjust at that lower level while still being held to that overall number of that 12%, but we've adjusted the mix of the other two regions that we're not overriding. And then you can then cut that across to your different products. You can then override specific product lines and ultimately model out like what your monthly, let's say, sales or revenue targets are. But then from here, we can actually then take a look at what that means from a workforce point of view. And here's sort of that first workforce planning technique, which is very high level, where essentially what you'll see is that we have a projected current capacity, and we have a targeted capacity based on that high level 12% year-over-year growth rate. And so we have a gap, and a pretty significant gap, about 50%. And we also have some assumptions around attrition, cost of hiring, what the ramping profile looks like for new people, what their compensation, both fixed and variable, would be, as well as any kind of productivity productivity factors. So first is, what if we try to change kind of how we work, or we implement a new solution or something, and that potentially would allow us to increase productivity by 10%. And you can see that we're kind of shrinking that gap and it's moving in real time. But ultimately, we might need to look at adding some people. So here what we're doing is we're saying, well, we have three different levels. We have senior, mid-level, and junior. So what if we add 4 seasoned people? And you can see that gap closes quite a bit. And what if we add 2 mid-level? And then ultimately, maybe, we're going to need to plan for attrition. So we want to bring on 2 juniors as well. And now you can see that by, adding, in this case, 8 people, we've now closed that gap. So, but this doesn't tell us anything about those people in terms of where they'd be hired, what their specific, compensation, benefits might be, but a detailed breakdown. We've got some fixed and we've got salary and variable. We don't have any ancillary costs. But this is one technique of workforce planning where you're basically just entering numbers of people, and based on high level assumptions around salary and variable compensation, you're getting then a projected cost of hiring. The one additional aspect of this, though, is that it's connected to the financial side of a house based on those revenue targets. So now you're seeing the benefits of being able to have those 2 groups or 2 teams connected together, to be able to see what the impacts of that upstream change in revenue growth was ultimately on the number of people we now need to hire as a result of that. And Anaplan allows you, because it's everything's in memory and connected in real time, you're able to instantly pivot to any of those upstream changes as well. So that's the first technique that I wanted to share with you. Another technique is something that maybe is a little bit more granular. So we're just going to go to this example here, where we can see sort of our cost center dashboard. We're going to click on salary and benefits. And here's a look at being able to plan almost at a zero basis, where you have existing employee roster, and then you have the ability to, first of all, enter changes to those rosters. Is someone moving to a new role? What's the new role start date? Is there a termination involved? Did they become a contractor? Those types of things. But you can also add new placeholders as well, where potentially, you don't know who's going to be specifically hired, and you click on a button on a dashboard to do that. And I'm going to add a new placeholder, but you have the ability to add those placeholders without defining a lot about those placeholders, because ultimately, a person's going to enter that role, but you don't know who they're going to be. So there's that new placeholder that's been added, and we can say, this is going to be a new role, and we need those juniors, right? So I'm going to hire this is going to be one of those 8, right? We can hire that junior person. We can then bring them on, let's say bring them on, let's say September of 2022. And we will hire them, let's say September 5th. And just by doing that, you can see that Anaplan has automatically modeled out their salary and any ancillary costs that go along with that, because there's built-in calculation logic that's based on the lookup salary of that particular role, and when that person starts, to then calculate, and using benefit rates to then model out their salary. And then if we decided we want to defer this for a couple of weeks, maybe we want to make them the 19th instead, you'll see that Anaplan just automatically remodels the salary compensation, the September costs, because we've pushed it out a couple of weeks. And you'll also notice that we're entering a month, day, year here. So you can be very accurate and specific in terms of when you're going to bring people on. You also have the ability to say, well, what if they become a contractor? What does that mean? Well, ultimately, we're going to gross up their salary because they got to cover their own benefits, but we won't be paying them any benefits. So what's the impact of that? So you can kind of capture all these sort of different scenarios. So that's kind of planning at that placeholder level. Now, how would this connect to a broader HR, sort of HRIS system, right? So if we think about where your existing employee roster would be kept, it'd be your HRIS system, or your human capital management system. We can connect to that system. Anaplan can connect to that system and bring in your existing employee roster, and then you would use Anaplan to plan those incremental movements. Like if there's transfers, terminations, new hires, you would do that in Anaplan. But then you can also connect to a recruiting platform, right? Where essentially you want to plan for a new hire. You can then tag that with a requisition ID that then feeds through to your recruitment platform, where then that's where people submit resumes, and you have candidates and so on, going through different stages of interviews. And ultimately, when a person ends up in that role, they're linked by requisition ID, so that when that planned hire becomes an actual hire, they get created in the HRIS system as an actual employee. They get paid through there, and then that data flows back into Anaplan, where you then are able to align based on requisition ID, so that your planned hires and your actual hires are kind of on the same plane, if you will. So that's one example of planning, and that's planning at kind of like that placeholder level, or that potential individual level. And you can also layer in all your different workforce planning assumptions around their salary and commission rates, also like annual merit increases based on years of service. You can also capture any kind of benefits, costs, and caps, rates and caps, and so on. And Anaplan has applies this logic, understands when FUTA or SUTA caps have been met, and incorporates that into the calculation. You also can go a little bit more high level and actually plan at like an individual requisition level. So this is more like position planning, where you can actually create new positions, give that position an identifier, and then indicate like what's the detail associated with this position. Is it a backfill from attrition? Is it a new coverage? When are they going to start? What role it is, and also like what type it is. Is this a backfill? Is it a new hire? Is it a promotion, etc.? So you have the ability to kind of model or to do your workforce planning more at a position level rather than individual names. And again, we see that organizations, different organizations have different preferences in terms of the level of planning they want to embark on. Anaplan is very flexible and agile, and allows even different teams within the same organization to plan at different levels of detail. And again, that's that multi-level planning capability that Anaplan is just so strong at as well. So you can really pick the level of detail you want to plan at and just go with it. So that's the requisition planning piece. And then I wanted to share with you another example where here's some more techniques. We're going to get into like strategic workforce planning and so on, as well as talent strategy kind of in a future session. But just a couple of techniques I wanted to share with you is, first of all, being able to do things more from a top-down planning perspective. So here's an example here. We're very similar to the revenue piece that I showed previously, is the ability to just enter headcount growth rates, right? And then be able to then plan at sort of at differing levels of detail and do holds and overrides, and ultimately end up at a total headcount level of information. So you can do things at a very broad brush. You can do things. So it showed very granular, showed one level up, which is more position. This one's even higher, which is just like year-over-year growth rates of headcount numbers. You can plan that way as well. And again, even within the same organization, you can take different approaches to your planning, and you can actually have like a menu of different planning sort of options available to your teams within your organization, and they can pick the one that works for them. But they're all connected together, such that at some point all those plans are going to be connected and consolidated up to some like common level of detail, and Anaplan can do all that work. Then you've got, so that's an example of top down. Then you have another example of like more like operational planning, where essentially, if you have like an hourly workforce and you do like your sales or revenue planning based on units and prices and cost per unit, and you want to plan that 12% revenue, that can now translate down into your different product lines that you might be selling, and what those individual growth rates would look like, or those individual plans for each product would look like. And ultimately, you're going to need to produce those products. And this is where you can layer in assumptions around, well, first of all, like, what rate type are we looking at? What's the rate per hour? How many hours in a particular shift? How much time do we allow for a break? Is there any kind of overtime cap associated with it, and any kind of non-productive time? So you can layer out kind of those parameters for in this case, your hourly workforce. And then Anaplan can give you a view of, well, based on the number of hours that are needed to produce these labor hours to produce these products, connected again back to that revenue plan, this is how many FTE we're going to need based on assumptions around productive hours per day and throughput and so on. This is the number of people we're going to need, and you can decide, okay, when do we want to hire these people? So in this case, we need 3 FTEs, basically right away. So we can go ahead and do that. And by by entering that FTEs, then that updates our needed headcount projections going forward, where you can say, okay, if I want to hire 5 immediately that month after, what's the plan, what's the planned cost associated with that? And, how many what's our gap look like in terms of the number of hours? And you can see that, potentially by doing that, we resolve sort of our deficit to the point where at the end of the year, we might actually have a surplus of labor hours. So again, just being able to, look at things more from a driver-based perspective, connected to an upstream point, which is that revenue plan by product, and then being able to translate that into how many labor hours we're going to need and determine how many FTEs we're going to need to do this. And, we need 4 temporaries, so we'll add those as well. And we can immediately see like what our over under is, what our temp staffed hours are, and ultimately what our planned labor cost is compared to that top down target, which again is also connected together, right? So being able to kind of model this out, all in real time is very valuable, in a time compressed, urgent decision making type of environment where timely decisions, have benefits. So that's one piece there, and another one is more of like a ratio example. So in this case here, maybe we maintain certain ratios of people. So we could have, in this case, if we want to change, in this case, you can have different roles, what positions they're tied to from ratio point of view, and then say, well, okay, maybe I need to make this one 4-to-1. We can go ahead and do that, and that automatically adjusts ultimately what our headcount requirements are going to need, what our current cost is, etc. So just by tying one role to another and determining a ratio, that will then automatically drive out what your workforce plan is going to look like. And again, what you're seeing here is Anaplan is capturing like different disparate sources of data, right? It's capturing things like hours, it's capturing ratios, it's capturing volumes, etc. And being able to kind of bring all that data into one place and be able to use it to help better inform your planning process is a huge advantage. And then just a bit of a preview of other things you can get into with Anaplan is more on like the strategic side. So let's go ahead and just spend a little bit of time there. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to go to our strategic workforce planning. And you can see here that it can create new strategic initiatives, which you've already seen. We can also forecast demand for critical roles. So here is, being able to select a role and determine like what business drivers, determine that or impact that role and what the weighting of that impact is, and have that drive your workforce plan. So just by saying, maybe, maybe in this case, product categories are maybe a little bit higher, and I'm going to take this one down to 55%. That then automatically tells us like what our headcount change needs to be, what our changes in costs are, etc. So just being able to, ultimately determine based on those business drivers how many people you're going to need in that particular role. You can model that out in real time and see a waterfall chart of a starting headcount, how many based on those business drivers, how many people you're going to need, and ultimately where your final headcount is going to end up, and ultimately what the cost of that is. Then if we take a look at things like supply gaps, so being able to look at do we have any gaps ultimately, and what do those gaps look like, and you can see here different scenarios, right? So you can have multiple different versions of your workforce plan and ultimately compare those together to then understand like where your gaps might be, to help then start closing those gaps. Then we can start looking at what it would take to kind of close those different gaps, and we can immediately see here, looking over time, how many people potentially we might need to train, how many new hires we might need to hire, and ultimately what the total cost of that is to close any gaps. And you also have assumptions around like time to ramp a contractor, time to ramp a new hire, and ultimately what is the right mix of that and the timing to help close those gaps in order to maximize benefits for the organization. And then ultimately scenario planning, again, the importance of that can't be understated, but Anaplan gives you the ability to compare multiple different scenarios together. You can create as many scenarios you want. They're completely unlimited. So we could pick our ultimate, our workforce plan number 1 to our workforce plan number 2, and immediately see a waterfall chart of, what the changes in headcount are between the different scenarios, how they compare together, how much it's going to cost to close the gaps, and so on. So being able to kind of model out and create scenarios instantaneously really leads to a much more nimble and agile organization and much more timely informed decision making. So that really wraps what I was planning to share with you today. So stay tuned for next week, where we actually look at a connected scenario, around talent and skills, and how Anaplan can address that.
We hope you enjoyed this panel session. Be sure to check out more in our series. And if you're interested, be sure to hit subscribe and like so you can be the first to know about our next upload.